Hey everyone, welcome back to our ongoing series through Lent, Reflections of 2020. Today we are grateful to have an educator with us, someone to help us look through the lens of what it was like to try and guide students during a time when things were different for all educational institutions. And as well as that, someone we know well, Carol Ayres, with an incredible background in music, both at the academic institution and in the church. And so I'm interested in this part of the conversation that has to do with music, not something I would have thought of, Michael, but some interesting detours through what happened in the musical world because of COVID and what changed for them, which I think is a pretty interesting side note.
There's some really interesting themes interwoven into the conversation that you might not initially think about. But music was clearly one of the early conversations about COVID and whether it could or could not happen. And musicians that are used to performing live had to radically switch into a far different context. And there's an interesting crossover that happens both in the musical world and then the way that music actually comes into our worship in the church. And so it's fun when we get to talk with Carol, who is both established as an educator and a musician herself, but also someone who loves and serves the church. And those two things come together, and I think in a really organic and interesting conversation. And of course, anyone who knows Carol knows whenever you sit down with her, you're going to notice and appreciate her optimism, her creativity, her just drive to continue to do things well, even in difficult times. And I think that pervades the conversation today.
Yeah, obviously we are very thankful to have Carol in the congregation and to have her do what she does for our music programs, for Bells, for all the time she's helped us find singers and musicians for different services and for the passion she brings to that, no less the passion that she brings to her educational tasks. And we are grateful that she would take the time to sit down and share her reflections with us, and we hope you enjoy it. Thanks for being back with us. Today our guest is well-known, familiar face around First Press. Carol Ayres has been our music director, well-known in the community, Iowa Lakes certainly. Carol, we appreciate you being with us. So in your world, as you think back on COVID, again, one of the themes we've been hearing is how everything changed so quickly for people. Not a lot of lead time. All of a sudden, everything's different. As a music teacher, as a college educator, walk us through that process, what you remember of what kind of warnings you got, what kind of scramble took place in that initial time frame to try and figure out what do we do next.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah.
The problem with us is we were getting ready for spring break.
Okay.
And so at the college, and we were getting ready for our spring musical. And so spring break happened, and we collectively as a faculty were trying to get the administration to make, and I'm not saying anything badly about our administration, but if the students are not going to come back, tell them now so they can take stuff with them.
Right.
But nobody really thought it was that big of a deal. But in that, from Friday afternoon till the following Friday afternoon, the world shut down, and our kids went home without stuff. So I felt really bad for our students because some of them went far away on trips and didn't really take winter clothes home with them. I mean, all those kind of things. And I'm really close with my students, and everything was locked down. In our musical, we got to practice one day of spring break, and the next day it was done. We were supposed to open up the brand new auditorium. Done. Everything was just shut down, and we were supposed to be ramping up for Lent and
Right.
Easter, and done. No music. It was really odd.
So, how did that initial transition happen? Was there some thought at Iowa Lakes that this would be temporary, or did they move toward we won't be having students back on campus? Did that happen fairly quickly, or did that happen over some time?
We extended our spring break for just 2 or 3 days, and then we said we were going to go virtually for a couple of weeks. That's what, I mean, everybody said
Right.
2 to 4 weeks.
Yeah.
And so we figured we would be back at school, for the last couple of weeks of school, and you could have all those final projects and finals face to face and do those last minute concerts and all that kind of stuff. And then it just never happened.
Yeah. So what does online music education look like? Again, one of the things that we're hearing as we talk to people is not only did everything happen quickly, but all of a sudden everyone was sort of thrust into trying to develop new skill sets, utilize new tools. For the most part, it wasn't just simply an extension of what we were already doing. It was reinventing the wheel in many cases. What did that look like in your world?
Well, for me, I had been teaching online since 2000. I was one of the first college people who did music online. I don't understand technology, but I'm not afraid to try it.
Gotcha.
And so, and we should talk about that sometime, because what they made me do with music to begin with was just silly. But anyway, so for me, switching my regular classes over wasn't that big of a deal.
Okay.
But you can't have rehearsals, even still today, online. You see these beautiful choir things and these wonderful band things. They're paying somebody a lot of money to put those clips on this screen. So we just met.
Yeah.
For band, we just met. We met once a week, we Zoomed, today you're in charge of putting together a silly game. Tomorrow, the next week, you're in charge of doing something. So they made Cahoots online, and we just so we still had that relationship.
Right.
There's no way, I kept saying to them, we got this big grand opening, so keep playing your horns, but you can't do that together online. So that was the biggest thing. My face-to-face classes went just right on Zoom, and I already have all the stuff online because I'm one of those faculty people. If the basketball team is gone yesterday, which they were, I allow them to make it up online. They can do it on the bus. They can do it when they get home. So my stuff is already online. I mean, they can do it with me. They can do it on their own. So I know a lot of people were scrambling, but for me, it was just
an extension of some
Right.
of the things you'd already
yeah,
done.
I just had to move stuff and open stuff up, and it wasn't nearly that horrible for me because I had already been doing it for 20 years.
Right.
So what does the summer look like? I know that you have done online in the summer, even in past years,
Yeah.
right? So that wouldn't be different. But I mean, as you were thinking, okay, fall is going to come, and we do have instruments, we do have singers, right? So is that you looking to the industry to help you figure out what the next steps are? Or Carol, what does it look like as you tried to plan for what the new normal would be in the fall?
We were really blessed, I guess, to say that we had some leaders in in the big universities who had the insight to get us all organized. Okay, like internationally, the music world organized, vocally, the opera companies, the high school choirs, the you name it, bands, string groups. We all came together and raised close to $1 million from all of our professional associations, and we did I didn't, but I'm a member of many of those associations. We did 3 major studies on aerosols. We did one in Colorado, where they have the best aerosol testing in the United States. There was one test done in Boston, which is the second best place, and they did one in Vienna. They test aerosols, but they tested aerosols. They brought in people playing horns and singing and did all that. And so we started having national Zoom meetings and webinars in March, the end of March. I mean, boom, they got it put together, and they told us what was going to happen, and we should expect this out the 1st of June, and then we should expect it out the 1st of July, and then it finally came out at the end of July, and that's when they said, you can mask yourself while you're playing, you can mask your horn, you can, certain instruments are not good, and they came up with these weird plastic bags to put over saxophones and clarinets because we have air holes. And then they realized those were just COVID bombs, because if you blew into this bag and then, some middle school kid has COVID and they don't know it and they fold this bag up. So they decided that those bags were not a good idea, but they had to do some experiments on that. So so we've evolved, but they've got the singers masks that stick way out, but that way and we've got these masks that you stick your mouthpiece through, and then when you're not playing, it falls down over your, it's just crazy. And we have masks for our horns, and we're sitting 6 feet apart this way and 6 feet apart this way, unless if you're a trombone player, and then you have to be 9 feet away because they extend 6 feet. I mean, not really, but they extend out 3 feet. So anyway, so we have all these rules we have to follow, and it's crazy. But we at least had the professional organizations giving us mandates. I shouldn't say mandates, suggestions.
Yeah, and did that community of music people writ large, which I'm sure is more nuanced than what you can just, sort of briefly overview, but I mean, was there largely a unified voice on that? People largely got on board, or was that a pretty significantly divided conversation?
No, I think they got on board because it was that church choir in Seattle, was it, that got the terrible press right off the bat, We thought music was going to be done. Organized music was going to be done. And so I think more people, I'm sure there's still people who don't want to do it, but more people rallied around it. And I can tell you the Iowa Bandmasters, which is another group I'm part of, we were definitely part of it. And the band director from the University of Iowa, he was already on this big oversight committee for the National Band Association and Iowa Band Association and all those kind of things. And so he was one of the leading guys on this COVID team. I don't know how to say it, but so yeah, we met. And I know Brett, our vocal guy, he was meeting with the choir people. We met as band people because you kind of got to divide groups up. Otherwise, you have such a big group, it's not. So the college band directors met, the Iowa band directors met. So we were having meetings about once a week or every other week, all from the end of March. Clear, we still have them. I had one Monday night just to talk about how is it working for you? Did this work okay? And we want music to continue. So
it's interesting, other than concerts and venues of professional music, the places where people probably experience live music the most often, churches and schools. And to lose access to some of that, both as a teaching perspective, but also just for people who gravitate to that, and in some ways, maybe manage their own stress levels by either participating or listening to it. I know one of the sad things about church has been it is just a different reality to watch something on a screen musically than to see and hear a person sing or perform with an instrument. And I think I can't imagine the challenge of how do we continue to try and provide that for people in a time that they probably really need it amidst all of these various challenges. So as you kind of look at it from that perspective, Carol, what in this moment, professionally speaking, musically speaking, what has been most frustrating or most difficult about that process?
Well, I think it's what you just said, is that we can't, I miss our choir here terribly.
Yeah.
Christmas Eve, I got all teary-eyed. I still do if I think about it. Not singing in church is weird to me. I've sung since I cannot remember anything different. And I've played.
Yeah.
It's just we still get handbells, but it's still,
Right. And as a non-musician, I miss receiving it, but I'm probably maybe would miss the reality for a person who offers it, for the person who says, this is how I share my talent with my faith community or school community or whatever. To lose that has to be difficult for people.
It is. And lots of people email me and say, I sure miss choir, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to come back,
right.
But I sure miss it. And
yeah. Well, because there's also, I think, that sense, and our church choir is a wonderful example of that, and a lot of that is credit to you. It's not just about the singing. There's a sense in which there's a community that forms, and lots of people end up drawn by those kind of similar interests and similar passions, and that becomes for them relational. And so not only have they lost, I can go sing in church, but they've lost, I spend an hour every week with people in my church group, my choir, that I like, and that we have those times together.
And we all pray for each other, and we have that fellowship.
Yeah, it kind of functions as a small group, really.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely that. And so we haven't got to meet, for a long time, it seems like.
It's interesting you say that, too, because your comment about we were worried that we wouldn't have music anymore back in the beginning really struck a chord with me, because especially in the beginning, and these sort of conversations have really happened throughout, people have remarked about their fear about what if people don't come back to church, which is a similar refrain, the idea that what if it doesn't come back on the other side. And I'm curious, as someone whose life work and passion is invested in music, right? What is your feeling on that right now? Are you feeling hopeful that music is strong and it's going to come back in the way that we knew it, or will it come back in different ways? What's your hopes looking forward?
Well, I hope it comes back strong like it was before. But I think it will be different. I think everything's going to be different. But, I fear that now, in Northwest Iowa, our choirs are meeting, our bands are meeting, our schools are meeting. But there are schools in Iowa that are not meeting. Their bands haven't met since, and I'm assuming choirs. I don't talk to that many choir directors, but I know their bands have not met since the middle of October. Because their schools are online. Right. You can't bring the band in, I don't know if their sports are meeting or not, but so it's hard to stay motivated by yourself as a elementary student, as a middle school student. Are they gonna continue to play? Are they gonna continue to, that's what I worry about, is that are we going to get so much dropout, so the attrition rate is going to be so high that it won't, I mean, I don't worry. I'm not a worrier, okay? But I do ponder it sometimes. You know, my sophomore class, my current sophomore class, half of them didn't come back to school because they didn't want to be online or even virtual.
Right.
Let's just take the semester off. Well, they didn't come back this semester either. So are they going to come back to school? And when they come back, will they participate in music? You know, those are, you know, trust me, I'm reaching out to them, but.
Yeah. Well, and music is fundamental in our lives in so many ways, but it's also connected to things. For instance, you know, high school basketball games that are now finding a way to play, but no pep band. So, I mean, just even those places where live music intersects with other things, and to lose that kind of frame of reference, I can see the concern. You know, has that created a lag, and what will it look like to catch back up to that? You know, you have kids going to college next year who may not have been in their band for the last 12 months, and what does that gap look like in terms of closing it down the road? That's really interesting.
Well, and music is a lifelong skill. I mean, nothing personal, but you're not going to play football when you're 80.
Yeah, nor
Probably.
should you.
Nor should you. Yeah. But my grandmother played the piano and sang up to 2 weeks before her death at age 89. You know.
Yeah.
So I play in a big. Well, I used to play in a big band, and you know we played with some people who played up to their death.
Yeah.
You know. So I mean, it's so you think this group of people you're talking about who maybe, you know, they were sophomores and they didn't have band their sophomore year, so they didn't. You know, it wasn't so cool. Then again, because it.
Yeah.
So they really missed out where they may have been, had they kept it, they may have been a lifelong player. Or
Yeah.
I just hope the world doesn't miss them all.
Yeah.
Well, and we've talked about this, about how very difficult in the digital space, ones and zeros, it is to accurately represent music. And I mean, like, just to make that very practical, in our church services, to have music that is even a decent replica. Replica is not the right word. Representation of what you would have heard in the sanctuary is very hard. It takes a lot of technical skill to get microphones and mixing. And I wonder, Carol, if you think that there will be a new appreciation for acoustic music. I mean, music in that band that shows up at the restaurant, the place where you go to hear live music. Do you think that there's a sense in which there'll be a new resonance with that after this time?
I hope so. I really hope so. Because I think it's going to be important to perpetuate it. You know, the other thing, what we were talking about the other night, is that when you record something for church, you're so picky. You know, let's do that again. I made a mistake. But if you were doing it live, people would just think, oh, that was awesome.
Right.
They do not hear every little nuance, but for some reason, when it's recorded and they can back up and go, what did they say? Did they say that word wrong? Or was that a little flat? Or I know a lot of people don't do that, but we musicians do that. We're so critical of ourselves, you know. So that's, I'm hoping live music, you know, gets revised, because it's hard to keep recording.
We've laughed about the same phenomena preaching, that the ability to call time out and restart, you don't have that with a live audience. No matter what you said or meant to say, or what, if you lost your place, you push through it and figure it out. And what a different approach it is to say, let's redo that part, or no, that's not what I wanted to say. And in some ways perhaps that makes for a cleaner end product, but what it does is remove people from being in the experience with you, which I think when it comes to music, it is such a fundamental part of why we, have the same 10 songs at every funeral, and why we, just there's a resonance with people that matters hearing it live, I think, in a way that isn't always true in other things.
Along that same lines, like we recorded our Christmas concert and our jazz concert, and the first song was really good. And they went, no, I'm not being critical, but no one appreciated it. No one clapped. Mm-hmm. It's hard to keep. I mean, if no one cheered through the whole ball game, which no one, it's hard to stay up. Mm-hmm. Even this, we recorded the handbells the other night, and not that the applause is important, it just means we appreciate you. In my opinion, we appreciate that you did that, not that you were awesome, oh my gosh, but thanks for doing that. Mm-hmm. It just, there's something about, I'm not a glory seeker.
No, but the difference between two-dimensional and three-dimensional is a real thing. That's a very real dividing line.
Yeah, it's very different.
But it has implications for worship. I've actually learned this about worship in this season, that we in the Reformed tradition talk about worship as participatory, that the people there are participating, and the idea is that you're sitting in the pews and these musicians are offering their gifts. In the Reformed tradition, we say that we're all worshiping in that moment, not just the person up front. Mm-hmm. Because we're all sharing in this moment, and if I can't sing that song, they can on my behalf. Mm-hmm. And my prayer is, God, hear this song. I think that's exactly the thing that is difficult to do on a 2D screen in your living room, is to feel like, God, that's my prayer too. I'm with Carol, I'm with Doug, I'm with this musician that's offering this. I think it's far easier to look at that screen and to say, hey, this is where I tune in to get a laugh at night. This is where I watch ball games. This is where we watch movies. And so this is another form of entertainment, which is what worship isn't. Worship is participatory. And so though it is a challenge, it makes me wonder, how do we continue to try to both encourage and also be reminded as worshipers that this too is a setting in which we're supposed to try to engage with this person. So my point is, I think it's not just hard for the musician who doesn't feel connected to the fellow worshipers. It's hard for the worshipers to feel connected to the musician in a meaningful way.
No, I agree. Yeah, because I'm sometimes on this side, listening to those people, and I like to be involved with them too. I like them to be live.
Right.
Yeah. Carol, one of the questions we're sort of asking people to reflect on in their own circles, as this pushed us all to develop some new approaches, maybe some new skill sets, is there anything in your world, either academically in general or music education in particular, that you think stays with us when COVID hopefully isn't with us anymore? In other words, in the midst of developing Zoom meetings and different approaches to education, is there anything that you can see that may stick that we've learned to do now as educators and we feel like it's worth continuing? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I can speak for an educator, maybe not as much as a musician. I think these virtual choirs and stuff are amazing, but you have to have some serious technology skills to get those done. Yeah. But I love it that I can go to all these different meetings without driving to Des Moines.
Yeah.
And I love it that I can go to all these different conferences without having to cancel my classes. And I also like the fact that, we have 5 campuses, and I never get to teach the kids in Spencer. I shouldn't say that. I never get to see the kids in Spencer. They're always totally online. And now because of virtual classes, I'm seeing and meeting the soccer players. Not meeting, but at least seeing them in that little tiny box. Yeah. So I think even though when we go back to face-to-face classes, I will probably still have a virtual class, just for their sake, because not everybody wants to take a totally online class. Mm-hmm. And so you can still guide them through the process virtually. So I think we'll probably keep some of those. And I love that, faculty meetings, we don't have to drive to the other campus. We can just, I think that's really good. So I see that happening, but I can't wait to have real people in front of me too.
Right. Let me ask a follow-up question, because I think I've heard this conversation to some extent as students, college students, and one of them, is in my house off and on, depending on what's happening with the world. Part of that conversation has been, what is the value of going to campus? In other words, if kids can take these classes online, if we can provide, without the dorms and without the cafeterias, and to some extent it may be a way for a college to cut expenses, but we've been managing to do some of this now, and I know that there are families that have asked, well, why does my son or daughter need to go off to school? And so I would just be, as a person who's spent a lot of time with college kids, building relationships, is passionate about that. Do you have an opinion in that conversation? Do you have a thought in terms of what is it beyond the class part that we offer kids that makes having a place where they go and study worthwhile? I think that's an interesting conversation. Not one that I'm well versed in, but I just wonder if you have some thoughts.
Well, I think the purpose of the college campus is like a melting pot. Right now in my one class, I have 2 young men from Africa who are here to play soccer.
Yeah, in Estherville, Iowa.
Just in my one class of 30 people, I have 2 kids from Africa. So that in its own right is a unique situation, especially here in Northwest Iowa. I also think you don't want your kid to live in your basement their whole life. So this is a way for them to go and have some guided development.
Yeah, they're not necessarily off the deep end right away.
Well, right.
Sink or swim. They've got a little entry into it.
And, as an advisor, I am an advisor for more than just classes. Like yesterday, we had a long discussion about a boyfriend who wasn't very nice. Now, that student could have had that conversation with their parents, but they may not. Mm-hmm. And so I always say to people, I'm not your mother, but you can consider me like maybe your favorite aunt. I will just tell you how it is, and that's how it is. But so there's a different kind of relationship. It's just, I think musically, I can't say all professors do that, but my kids are with me a lot. My kids, see how I say that? My students are with me a lot. They are my kids. I take care of them, and we celebrate birthdays, and we feel badly when there's a funeral, and we support each other. And so we make our own little community, which is good for them. And I hope they learn values and things like that. Like one of these people today said to me, you're going to make cupcakes for your niece's graduation? My family would never do that. And I said, well, maybe you can be the start of that. I didn't even know this girl. She was not in my program, but I offered them cupcakes. I said, I'm practicing because I have to make cupcakes. for my nieces, you would do that? Yeah.
So what I think I hear you saying in that is that beyond the grades and the degree and the education, part of what a college campus offers kids is to an opportunity to expand their circles, both with adults, with others, possibly with some multiculturalism, and just begin to get a sense of the bigger world that certainly is probably lost if you're at home looking at your computer screen for the bulk of your secondary or college education.
Well, and you can attend concerts and sporting events and maybe belong to the chess club, and you've never played chess but you want to learn how, and there's a whole group of like-minded people who want to learn to play chess, and just there's a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of opportunities in your community too, but you go out and you have to go out. I mean,
I think maybe, if it's okay, just very briefly to sort of hone in a little bit more personal, one question that we've been asking those who've been willing to join us is to reflect just for a moment on the challenges of this season personally. Obviously, we all have the things we're navigating professionally, but how has this touched you in a way that you would say this season of the last 8-9 months has been hard? Has it been relationally or spiritually, or is there a way that this has been heavy for you as a season?
And I don't mean to sound like Little Mary Sunshine, but it wasn't hard for us. It was kind of a blessing. All of a sudden, my world came to a halt. Now, mind you, I had to work hard professionally to keep all my classes, which lots of things when I do face-to-face, I don't have as much grading, so I had a lot of grading, but I didn't have any responsibilities at night. Doug didn't have any responsibilities at night. We put together puzzles, we ate a lot, then I had to diet, but, cut back. But, it's like, hey, should we have popcorn tonight? I mean, so just stuff like that. But the hardest part about the beginning was Emily went and lived with Laura, and we were not allowed to come because Matt moved out and everybody was scared. So that was hard at first because, my girls and I see each other a lot. But it was kind of nice being home really more than one night a week. We missed everything, and it was disappointing. This thing got canceled, and then this thing got canceled, and then this thing got canceled, but you had time to actually read a book and study, and I don't know, I thoroughly enjoyed church. I think part of that was I wasn't constantly working in church. Right. I don't mean that badly. I love that part, obviously.
I understand.
But just Doug and I are rarely on this side. We're usually up there doing something on one side, on the other side. And so you could just fully, I don't know. I did not have a terrible time with it. I was very disappointed that the grand opening, those concerts still haven't happened. We've not had audiences in that. We have not been able to have music as we used to know it. We're having rehearsals, but people are, it's just weird. But I haven't struggled that way.
Maybe as an educator, maybe you anticipated the following question as well, because that seems to be where the next question was going, was how have you adapted to whatever struggle that is, and what have you found on the other side of it? And it sounds like you've already been processing. I guess I wonder then, Carol, do you foresee that experience that you just described shaping the future choices that you make on the other side of this? When we return to opportunities where calendars can be filled every night, do you think that this will shape how you orient yourself to that, or not?
No. Clint's laughing before I even answer. No, I will jump back in, dive in head first, and be completely immersed.
Yeah.
This is who I am. I can't help it. But I was kind of scared that I was going to be stir crazy, because I'm well, and Doug too, you know. But I think we were okay.
You know, I don't know that I would have ever thought of it like this, Carol, but with music, probably not quite so much with education, but with corporate music, it's interesting how much of that happens on a kind of build-up. In other words, it's sort of event-driven. As you say, we had this concert, we had the spring musical, we had these things that months and months of prep go into, and then they're over either that night or in a couple of shows. And to kind of, your life is sort of constantly start a new ramp, jump it off.
Right.
Start a new ramp, get it done.
And sometimes you're trying to drive on 2 ramps at the same time.
Yeah, I can imagine. And so the idea that at some level what this provided for you was a long flat road to say, the next thing that all I have is the now thing, right? I'll put a puzzle together because there's nothing else that I have to do instead. And I'm sure that does feel at some level like a reprieve from a very busy treadmill that I of course know you'll go back to. But I don't think you're alone in that. Even in these few conversations that we've had, that idea that COVID canceled all of our calendars and we didn't have a choice, and that seemed initially like a bad thing, but it turned out it wasn't all bad.
It wasn't all bad.
And I think that is an interesting place for people to reflect as they re-enter the possibility to begin reconnecting, to be able hopefully not to abandon that completely, and to maybe be more intentional about how do I structure so that I do feel like I'm at some extent, at some level, in control of my calendar instead of the other way around. And yeah, I think that's a very interesting and I don't think unusual experience.
So I guess I'm curious, if we're looking for last words, we ask Carol, the educator, what is a lesson that you would offer that you've learned in this season?
Just stay positive. I don't know. I've always been, I'm not always perfectly positive, but there's always something exciting that's going to happen. And I don't know, I just have always, I don't mean to get really weird here, but, I was raised in a really strong Christian home. And it was like, why are you worried about that? Why are you worried about that? You're not in control of that. God is. So just let it go. That's what my dad said all the time. As a farmer, he was like, my mom would be like, oh no, Dad's like, you don't have control over the weather. Let it go. God's in control. And so just God's in control. All the political upheaval, it's confusing, it's crazy, but God is in control. And there's no reason to worry.
Carol, we want to thank you for your time, not just in this instance, but for all you do for First Press. We are blessed by you regularly, by your work, and by what you mean to the choir. And I hope you know that of the things people look forward to returning to, live music at church is high on their list as regards First Press. So we look forward to that soon, and hopefully in coming days.
Good. I hope so too.
Yeah. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.